everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I serve as the Community Investments Manager for the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts. Welcome to today's Wait What conversation on reproductive justice and the future of Roe v. Wade. Thank you so much for joining us. We have people joining us from Facebook Live and also here on Zoom. For 25 years, the Women's Fund of Western Massachusetts has provided community investments in the form of grants, capacity building workshops, hosting convenings around topics such as this, and uplifting women and girls serving organizations around strategic priorities, including economic security, addressing parity in positions of power and leadership, and freedom from gender-based violence, harm, and harassment. This particular Wait What series, which I am extremely excited about, will be tapping into all three of these. Our Wait What series allows us to further engage members of our community on how these issues directly impact those we serve and to provide resources on how to best address these disparities. We want to take this moment to thank our underwriters, the Jamrod Group, Institute for Generative Leadership, and People's Bank for their continued support of women and girls in Western Mass. It is because of their generous support that programs such as our Wait What series are provided complimentary to our community. Given the recent news and discourse and discord around the impact of the leaked proposed Supreme Court move to overturn Roe versus Wade, we wanted to convene members of our community to talk about what we can do next. Today's conversation will cover both reproductive access and birth justice, as we wanted to ensure that everyone was informed of the current resources, legislation, and work that is being done in our region and across the state. Today's conversation features doctoral candidate at Boston University School of Social Work and co-chair of the Board of Directors for the Eastern Massachusetts Abortion Fund, Greer Hamilton, as moderator, Dr. Carrie N. Baker, the Sylvia, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Dlugasch Bauman Chair of American Studies and a professor in the program for the study of women in gender at Smith College, and Marissa Pizzi, Deputy Director for Collective Power and Reproductive Justice and Community Activists. Complete bios on each of our guests is available on our website at mywomensfund.org. At the end of our conversation, we will open it up to respond to questions from our viewers. If you have any questions, especially as they emerge, please feel free to type them in the Q&A feature for those joining us via Zoom. We will hold prompting these questions to our panelists until the end of the conversation. So I would like to turn it over to our participants.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm really excited to be here with Marissa and Carrie. I just want to start with just offering a thing before we go into our questions for today. Even though we know that it's likely that Roe will be overturned, I just want to remind people that Roe has not always allowed for people to access abortions. And so while we'll be talking about barriers and challenges that might come after, Roe is overturned this month potentially, keep in mind that people have already been experiencing limited access to abortions across the country. And here, even in Massachusetts, people face difficulty accessing abortions. I'm going to start with our first question, which is around the landscape of reproductive care and abortion in Western Massachusetts. And I'm going to ask Carrie if you could speak a little bit to that question about what does it look like here in Western Massachusetts?
Sure, yeah, thank you so much, Greer. So, in December of 2020, Massachusetts passed the Roe Act, which created an affirmative right to abortion health care in the state of Massachusetts. It removed parental consent requirements for 16 and 17-year-olds and allowed for the first time abortion health care post 24 weeks in cases of fatal fetal anomaly. Before that, people had to travel out of state. Now, we know, right, from recent reporting that people are still having to travel out of state, that the law has not been fully enacted, but we have, relatively good state-of-the-art abortion health care. and recently we also started having telemedicine abortion healthcare. And I want to just very quickly share my screen with you to show you what the access is to telemedicine abortion healthcare here in Massachusetts, because it's quite extensive. If you go on the website of the organization Plan C Pills, you can find out exactly who is currently offering telemedicine abortion here in Massachusetts. So this is abortion by pills, which can be used through the 12th week. And there are quite a number of providers. And here you see the price, the delivery time. So this would be, you would consult with somebody either online or by video conference, and then they would mail you the pills, often overnight or quickly if you need them. Forward midwifery, aid access, My Abortion Network, the Maya Network, Lilith Care. And you can see there's a range of prices, a range of, like Lilith does online consultation by form. If you want a video conference, you can have it. Abortion on demand, they can deliver it within 1 day. CareFM, so there's quite, and then Planned Parenthood is also offering this service. Some of these take insurance, some don't. Some are sliding scale. So if you can't afford anything, they will provide the pills for you. Aid Access is a service that does that. So again, plancpills.org. You can put in the Massachusetts website and find that. So, I mean, we have pretty strong abortion rights and access here in Massachusetts, but we still have a long way to go. And I know we'll be talking more about that. But we know that Roe versus Wade is likely to about to be overturned, and 26 states are going to make abortion illegal. And the anti-abortion's next step is to ban abortion in all 50 states. They've made that clear. That will happen either by congressional act if the Republicans get the trifecta of power in the 2024 elections, or, and I think this is more likely, the Supreme Court is going to rule that fetuses have full constitutional rights and strike down laws like the laws we have here in Massachusetts. So I think that's where we stand as a big picture.
If I could bring us into a little bit more granular about to show a little bit more of like where we currently are and what it looks like for people to access, right? Like so in addition to being, actually before I start that, I'm going to say, I want to just name, my name is Marissa Peasy. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-chair of the Abortion Rights Fund of Western Mass Board, as well as Deputy Director of Programs and Policy for Collective Power for Reproductive Justice. I also want to name, I'm not feeling the best today, and this conversation is super important to me, so it was important to just continue to show up, but you're getting a little bit more of a subdued Marissa today, if you've seen me before and know how much fierceness and passion I typically bring. So wanted to just give you all that heads up. But now back to the question. So to bring it a little bit more granular and down, right? The Abortion Rights Fund of Western Mass covers all 4 of the western counties of Western Massachusetts to make sure that at least from Hampshire and Hampden County and Franklin County and Berkshire County, all of those folk who are with us, we are here to support, and that you are our main priority. So receiving reproductive and abortion care in Western Mass is a little bit similar to a lot of some of the folk who we see in the national landscape, right? Like it is a very diverse and varied experience for people, depending on their socioeconomic class, depending on their location within the 4 counties, and also depending on their life and how many different barriers and what they have within their life. I'm kind of moving us a little bit to the second question, Greer, and kind of also still talking about the landscape. But so anyway, to say that we have a very diverse lived experience in this area means that we also have a very diverse group of needs. And so when we were discussing how and what was important for us to raise in this conversation, one of the things that was really clear in our conversation, in our pre-conversation, was that we are a microcosm. Western Mass is a microcosm of and a reflection of the national landscape, because we have so many, we have rural parts of our counties, we have very, very urban parts of our counties, we have people of all different walks of life. We have lots of different socioeconomic, from people who are severely poor to people who are super rich, right? So we run the gamut, and the landscape really is a reflection of the national landscape within Western Mass. And so while that is very interesting and unique for us, it also presents all of the problems that come with that very diverse group of lived experiences. And so it was really important for us to situate that and for everyone to understand that we are speaking about a very diverse group of people when we're talking about the lived experiences of Western Mass.
Thank you both. Before we, I think, go on to the second question, Carrie, when you showed the Plan C website, right, it talks about how you can access at-home abortion pills. Do you want to just clarify for us and for everyone here the difference between like telemedicine or self-managed abortion before we go into barriers?
Sure, absolutely. So 54% of abortion in the United States today is done by medication. The abortion pills are actually two pills. The first pill is mifepristone, which blocks progesterone, which is what maintains a pregnancy. So you take that pill and the pregnancy begins to shed. You wait 24 hours and then you take a second pill, which is misoprostol, which causes contractions and expels the contents of the uterus, usually within about 6 hours. The experience can feel like a heavy period if it's early in pregnancy, but it can also be, you can cramp pretty significantly, sometimes have a fever, but usually it's very, very safe. These pills are safer than Tylenol and they're 98% effective. It's very rare that they're not effective. So, what you do is you go on the website of one of these organizations and you fill out a form giving some of your basic medical information, and the websites are all very secure. And depending on the provider, sometimes they will just send you the pills if you're eligible, and most of the time you're eligible, or they'll do a video conference with you. And then as soon as it's all cleared up and the payment is made, and again, some of these providers have sliding scales and will provide the pills for free if you can't afford them, they'll then mail them to you overnight if you need it, or usually within a couple days. So in states that are red and are likely to ban abortion, there is a robust underground, not even underground, it's above ground network of organizations to support people self-managing abortion. So if you're in a state where abortion is illegal, you can still access these pills through a number of options. And the best option is really Aid Access. That's Dr. Rebecca Gompertz, who's based in, Aid Access is based in Austria. And you go on her website, fill out the form, and she will mail you the pills. Now there is, it's only illegal in 3 states, but I suspect it will become more illegal in the future. And even if it's not explicitly illegal, cops and prosecutors are likely in the future to go after people. Only about 17 people in the last 20 years have been prosecuted for self-managing with pills. And those are pretty much all involve people much later in pregnancy. But we suspect post-Roe, especially with our hyper-surveillance state, that anti-abortion states are going to be pursuing people. So this is an area that I've written extensively on for Ms. Magazine, and I'll pop that link in the box if you're interested in learning more. But it's going to be what will make post-Roe different from pre-Roe. Pre-Roe, emergency rooms were packed with bleeding and septic women. Women died regularly of illegal abortion. Post-Roe, that is unlikely to happen. And we know that because women around the world in countries like Mexico that have had illegal abortion were not dying, and they were not dying because of abortion pills. So I think that's important to keep in mind, which is not to say some people won't die. They will. They will. This is dangerous. And actually, I'm more worried about people carrying pregnancies to term because it interferes with miscarriage treatment. But people who are doing it for abortion will also be at risk. But I think that we need to have this on our radar screen, and we need to share it with our friends and family, particularly if they live in those 26 states, that self-managed abortion using abortion pills that you can order online is available and is very safe, very easy, and very effective.
And I just want to also bring in that also surgical abortion, still a safe option, still something that people can access in the states that will still provide that, as well as self-managed abortion is also something, if you hear people talking about self-managed abortion in more situated in more cultural communities like Native American and Indigenous communities that use herbs, that's also a very safe way about going. So just wanting to make sure everyone understands that there's a lot of safe ways to access abortion. There's a lot of conversation and language about it not being a safe procedures, or it is absolutely safe. It is absolutely safe to access it in many multiple different ways. And so we want to make sure everyone knows that telemedicine, self-managed abortion, and surgical abortion are all still very much safe procedures that people can access.
Yeah. And that's something that, like, when you all hear for the attendees, right, when you hear people discussing it as being unsafe, to correct people, because it is, as Marissa and Carrie have both shared. And we'll have a resource guide, as Nicole mentioned, that we'll share with you all later that also has information about these organizations. So I want to move us to our next question, which is about what are some barriers to access to reproductive and birth care. We can go generally, but also here in Western Massachusetts.
So I'll take this one first, Carrie, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So from a national standpoint, the biggest barrier in access to reproductive health care and abortion is the Hyde Amendment, right? Like that was, and so the Hyde Amendment was an amendment that was introduced by, I believe his name was John Hyde. Is that
Henry
correct?
Hyde.
Henry, I knew it was some old school name like that. Henry Hyde, and he made sure that by introducing that amendment that people would not be able to use public funds with which in order to receive their abortions. And obviously that meant that that folks that would feel the biggest impact of that would be low-income folk, particularly Black and brown women who are already struggling in states that don't do a great job about making sure that people have access to abortion, to healthcare and health insurance. So the Hyde Amendment continues to be in the budget, continues to be something that we are constantly fighting and uplifting, that we want to see gone. We want to eliminate the Hyde Amendment and remove it from the barrier that is creating the most significant barrier. Though, as Carrie was just speaking into, we're feeling a little less positive about that, given the fact that there's so much energy towards how can states shut down fully any chance of abortion. So if abortion's not even available in your state, then the Hyde Amendment is a moot point. So just want to make sure that's really clear. The other barriers that are really important to name that I think people often don't really always think about because they're just thinking about the person getting the abortion. Other barriers are childcare, right? Like having other children. The majority of people who are getting abortions are already parents. So childcare becomes a significant issue for folk. Distance to a clinic, right? Like this before, right? Like Roe is still intact, right? Like we still have Roe, as Greer so beautifully said at the beginning of this conversation. And yet, even with it already still in place, distance is consistently a problem for most people, even in Western Mass. Right? Like somebody who is all the way up in the furthest corners of Berkshire County has to come all the way to Springfield. And if you start adding on all those barriers of not having a car, having childcare, they instantly, again, we see the microcosm of Western Mass showing the national landscape. So it's really important to think about distance and how we can support people in being able to gain their abortion through that. And then the final thing I want to lift up is insurance again. So yes, the state of Mass has done a great job about making sure that we have eradicated the Hyde Amendment issue, right? Like you can use your Mass Health funds to be able to get your abortion. However, the part that is a little less and a little more nuanced and confusing and hard for people is private insurance. This is where private insurance becomes actually a barrier because you have people who have access. Anybody who has access to the policy has access to what you use the policy for. Now, there are some laws on the books in the state of Mass that help to mitigate that. And Carrie, I don't remember the name of it, so hopefully you can help name the law that like prevents youth from parents being able to see that youth use their private insurance for an abortion. So there are things that are in place to try to protect people. However, if you are a college student in the state of Mass, but your insurance is in New Jersey, you don't qualify for that protection. So there's a lot of different continual barriers around private insurance. Also, I want to name the last thing I'll name about private insurance is we also have to hold that there are people, when people call, like we get callers at the Abortion Rights Fund and they'll say, I called my insurance to find out how much my insurance would pay for this. And the deductible was through the roof, but also the person was trying to tell me all of these awful things and telling me that I was going to die and spewing a lot of the talking points to this person. So we have a lot of different ways that barriers are in place to make it really hard for people to access an abortion and have the privacy that they deserve in their decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about a couple. Actually, I'm a professor at Smith College, and so I want to talk about college students. So here in Massachusetts, Lindsay Sabadosa, our local representative, has introduced legislation to make abortion pills available on public university health center campuses. So at the current moment, not one of our 13 public universities and state universities in Massachusetts offers abortion pills in clinics. And I've been working with Lindsay, and I did some research to determine what does that actually mean for students and their lives and their educations. And what I found out was students have to travel between 2 and 42 miles to reach the nearest abortion clinic, with a population weighted average distance of 18 miles, which if they have to take public transportation, it takes an average of 103 minutes, and the range is 18 minutes to 400 minutes. So let me just give you an example right here in Western Massachusetts. If you're at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and you need abortion health care, as of now, the health center does not provide that. You have to go to the nearest abortion clinic, which is Planned Parenthood in Springfield. Well, that's 24 miles away. And if you take a bus, and keep in mind, only 21% of students at UMass have cars. So it's likely you're going to have to take a bus. That 25 miles takes 2 hours and 18 minutes one way. So takes about 2 hours and 18 minutes down, you have your appointment, 2 hours and 18 minutes back. That's a full day where you're missing classes, you're missing extracurriculars, you're missing jobs. It's a tremendous burden on college students, and UMass isn't the worst. I want to just briefly share with you the research that I did, a map of what kind of distances students in Massachusetts are having to travel to get abortion health care. If you're at Fitchburg State University, it's 56 miles round trip, 3 hours. If you're at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, it's 76 miles a round trip. In part, that's because there's not good public transportation to the nearest abortion clinic. You have to go all the way through Pittsfield to get to Springfield. Westfield State, 3.5 hours round trip. And so it's a tremendous burden on college students. And I will put this website into the box, the chat box, because it has information on this legislation and how to contact your lawmakers. So this is an example of how we're working on trying to expand access to abortion health care for young people in the state. In addition, another barrier that young people and other people experience are crisis pregnancy centers, which are anti-abortion groups that create sort of fake health centers, trying to pretend and try to, divert people from abortion health care. And one reason that, for instance, college students, when they know their health center doesn't provide abortion pills, they go on and they search for abortion services. And if you do that in Western Massachusetts, at the very top of your Google search is most likely going to be Clearway Clinic, which is a crisis pregnancy center in Springfield. And what these centers do is they tell you misinformation. They say that abortion is dangerous. They say it causes breast cancer or infertility or depression. And all of this is inaccurate information, but this is what they say. And I did a story, an interview with a young woman who was at a college in Massachusetts, and I'm not using her full name or her college because I wanted to keep her privacy, but she went to a CPC in Worcester. And she was a pre-med student who knew about CPCs, and she was still tricked. Her boyfriend was president of the student council. They were both tricked. And she got there and she ended up getting in there, and they dumped all this abortion stigma information on her and told her that she was a mother and said she was killing her child. And it was very traumatizing for her. She did eventually get to real abortion health care, but it has marred her ability to trust healthcare providers. And so her detailed story, I just popped it in the box. I did an interview with her with Ms. Magazine, and it's there. So if you want to know what young people are experiencing here in Massachusetts, read that story. So there are 29 of these crisis pregnancy centers across this, just in the state of Massachusetts. There's only 11 clinics. So there's over almost 3 times as many of these crisis pregnancy centers. So you need to tell folks about this, make people aware. I know that advocacy groups like Reproductive Equity Now is doing a public awareness campaign around CPCs, but we need to speak out about them and get people aware. And then just the one other thing that's specific to here in Western Massachusetts that I want to mention is the closure of the Holyoke Birth Center, which COVID was used as an excuse. It was closed in 2020, in August of 2020. And again, this was a local birthing center in Holyoke serving primarily low-income Latino women who now have to travel out of their communities to hospitals that are, not convenient to them. And again, when we talk about reproductive justice and reproductive rights, we have to be thinking about birth justice, which is access to affordable, culturally sensitive, accessible birth care, pregnancy care, not just access to contraception and abortion.
And really quickly, before we move on, I saw that there was a question of confusion that I might have created. So Lee, just to clarify, surgical abortion would not be allowed in states that have eliminated the right and access to abortion. What I was saying is that surgical abortion would continue to be one of the many ways that people in a state that can access abortion would still be able to access it, and that it is also just as safe as medication abortion. So sorry if I confused you, but I want to make sure that's clear.
Although I will say there is an underground movement doing procedural aspiration abortions, but it's pretty deep underground and hard to access, but it absolutely exists. And you can go on eBay and buy one of those abortion syringes for $59. I have one right over here. Not that I'm using it. You have to be trained, and it's very illegal to do that for other people because that's practicing medicine without a license. But people absolutely are doing it, just like they did pre-Roe, the Janes. If you've watched that new documentary, it's definitely available. But primarily, if you need aspiration abortion, travel out of state. People in red states are going to have to travel.
Yeah, I think that's a really great pivot and reminder again that for people who need to travel to a state, there are groups that actually are working on being able to support people who have to travel intrastate, I think, or but have to travel between states. And so maybe Marissa, we can start with you in talking about organizations and how they're working to increase access to care.
Yeah, so across the state, and this is where Greer and I met, across the state, we are coming together in multiple different versions, right? So the Department of Public Health has been convening a group of independent clinics, abortion funds, and abortion doulas, and anyone that that works directly in people who are seeking abortions and supporting them getting those abortions. The Department of Public Health has been bringing together and convening a group of us to talk. And so within that group, we're getting really clear about organizing ourselves by type of support or direct service, right? So the providers are really getting clear about organizing themselves and making sure that they understand what each other are offering, right? Like it's really important that if they're not able to offer the procedure or their books are full, they know how to quickly move people along, because one of the most important pieces to abortion care is the timeline, right? Which is why there's been so many things that have been put into place, right? Like we didn't talk about those barriers because we don't experience them in this state, but there are states within our region, right? New Hampshire just repealed the transvaginal ultrasound requirement that was required before people could receive their abortions. So it's in our backyard, y'all. It's like all of those types of barriers as well. So what we are doing is really making sure that we as a group, so like the providers are doing their work, the funds are coming together. We are talking about what does it look like to create an experience for people who are seeking an abortion within the state of Mass, because the way that we think about people and the way we prioritize people is we prioritize them by our region, we prioritize them by state, and then we prioritize them by the actual overall New England region. And anybody who is coming to us is considered part of that priority or is already experiencing their services with us in any one of those versions. They are priority. So with that in mind, that means we have to really think about what are we doing to prepare. We know right now that people already come to the state of Massachusetts to receive their care. That's not anything new. It's not, but what we don't know is how much more is people are going to come. We have some ideas. We think that we're going to become a destination state, as all of the destination states around all of the red states, right? So like we're thinking about like Illinois is surrounded by a lot of red states. So as Illinois overfills, how much of that means comes to the state of Massachusetts or comes to the state of New York, or New York overfills, how much comes to the state of Mass. So we're not quite sure exactly what the flow is going to look like, but we are preparing like there's no tomorrow. We are thinking about and being ready for these folk, because we don't want our lack of organizing to be the reason why people don't receive the access that they deserve in the timeline that they deserve. So that is some of the ways that we're beginning to think about what does it look like from across the state to really get at how we're going to remain and keep access open. And then we also are looking at regionally, right? So we have an entire the New England region coming together to talk about, okay, this is how we do doula services. This is how we do transportation services. This is how we support people who are doing self-managed abortions. We're having those conversations. We're making sure that we as a region are prepared to support each other and prepared to take the influx that we know might come. Because again, we want to work together to make sure that no one feels the impact of the timeline burden that can come from us not having ourselves organized well enough to be ready to go. So that's some of the bigger picture things that we're doing. We're also doing some of the smaller things, right? Like we're really starting to think about, especially in the Abortion Rights Fund of Western Mass, how to become a reproductive justice fund that does reproductive rights work. And there's a big difference between just being a reproductive rights organization, right? That's what we had been for over 30 years. We were an organization that was literally, our bread and butter was funding abortions and making sure people had their funding. And that was pretty much what we did. And we did it really well. And we continue to do it really well. And we've recently made the decision in the last couple of years to expand ourselves into a more reproductive justice framework, which again, I will remind everybody, reproductive justice is the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, the right bodily autonomy, and the right to parent and raise our families in safe and healthy communities. So when we add all those together, this is where the birth justice lens comes from. This is where the full spectrum lens comes from. And it's really important to us as organizations that are creating access on this one particular piece of reproductive health care to actually think about the full lives of the people who are coming to us, and understanding, again, why we need to build out transportation services, why we need to build out childcare services, why we need to build out all of the different types of services that make it possible for the person to walk into the building or to receive their medication and be able to move forward with their procedure and feel like they have the space and the time that their body needs, that they need in order to have the best experience that they can have. We're not looking for people to like feel like they need to have like this high-end experience. So I don't want to get it confused around that. What we're looking for is basically, what do you define you need and how can we support you to get that? So it's a really important piece of the way that we're beginning to think about. And also, as we build that out, we see ourselves beginning to build bridges, right? Like, what are the states, as we start to notice those trends, as we start to see who's coming towards us, then who do we need to bridge towards? Who do we need to make sure that we're really defining those lanes and those access alley points so that we don't have to worry about ever being, again, the problem instead of the help.
And before we go to Carrie, I just want to make mention, right? So Marissa's point about the work that's happening regionally and also in the state, there are abortion funds across the country who are also doing this work. So keep that in mind in terms of like when people are looking for resources or looking to get connected into this work, that there are already existing organizations that are doing this for their local communities, right? That provide transportation, housing, money for people without questions asked about why they need the money for their abortion services. And so There's also a link in the resource guide to the National Network of Abortion Funds. And so if you're not familiar with abortion funds, would encourage you to become familiar with them. There are already 4 in Massachusetts alone, right? So there's Marissa's group, my group, Eastern Massachusetts, the Tide for Reproductive Justice, and the Jane Fund. So, Carrie.
And also,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, before, just one last thing that you reminded me of, Greer, is also there's practical support funds out there too. So supporting those as well. And so what practical support funds are, they are the people who are supporting who are helping to support all those needs that I just named: childcare, transportation, hotels, right? Like they are making sure that, so there are orgs that are starting to form to support the abortion funding groups, right? So we work in tandem together to make sure. So the Bridget Alliance is a really great one. I believe they're in New York or New Jersey. They're somewhere on the East Coast. Maryland, maybe, I don't know. I'm going to start just naming all the states on the East Coast, and eventually I'll pick the right one. But anyway, so please also be mindful of thinking about that the network that we are speaking to and we are trying to build also already exists, as Greer said, in other states. And there are already organizations that are building out these networks everywhere.
Thank you. Carrie, are there other organizations or work that's being done?
Yeah, absolutely. So Reproductive Equity Now and Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund of Massachusetts are 2 organizations that are kind of, among others, ACLU is also very active, leading the Beyond Roe Coalition, which is the Roe Coalition established when we were passing the Roe Act back in 2020. Now it's called the Beyond Roe Coalition, which I think has a double entendre. And this is a link to their agenda. I'm going to just very briefly share with you. It's right here. They have their own website, but it's linked off of Reproductive Equity Now, and they have it in various buckets. And so you can go down and see exactly what they're advocating for. And you can also, up here in the right-hand corner, sign on to their agenda. And the other page that I want to just flag is Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund. And the reason I'm going to scroll down and just show you some of the acts that are currently pending before the legislature, like the Healthy Youth Act, the HIV Prevention Access for Young People Act, this, which is Lindsay's bill, access to medication abortion on public campuses, but others as well, like the Out of Hospital Birth Access and Safety Act, the Equitable Access to Doula Services. So you can go and see these are the priority issues. It's not all the issues, but it's the priority issues that Planned Parenthood has suggested. And I will drop those links to both of those agendas into the box in case you're interested in following up on that. I do want to just flag a couple things. One is in the current budget, which is being considered, there's $2 million for abortion funds, which is wonderful. And we need to call our reps and encourage them to support that. But in addition, I want to flag that there is a new amendment to the budget. It's Amendment 388, which would do in Massachusetts what we're seeing done in states like Connecticut, New York, and California. So it would define reproductive health care and gender affirming care as legally protected healthcare activity in Massachusetts and protect the provision of that care by licensed Massachusetts providers physically present in Massachusetts, regardless of the patient's location. Why is this relevant? A Texas doctor can provide medication abortion, a Massachusetts doctor can provide medication abortion to a patient in Texas, even if Texas bans abortion, and be protected by the state of Massachusetts. This is hugely important. There's a movement across the country to try to protect doctors in blue states so they can provide telehealth services to people in red states. This is going to be a lifeline for people in those states. It's so important that we get this passed. In addition, this act creates a cause of action for interfering with legally protected healthcare activity in Massachusetts through abusive litigation filed in other states. So if somebody in Texas files an SB 8 bounty hunter case against Marissa because she's giving money to somebody who's coming from Texas to Massachusetts, Marissa would be protected by this act. And so would a healthcare provider here who's providing services to somebody traveling from Texas or some other red state. It protects physicians, assistants, nurses, pharmacists, psychologists, social workers, all these people from adverse consequences for helping people in the red states. It prevents Massachusetts law enforcement agencies from providing information or assisting federal or other state law enforcement agencies or private citizens with any investigation or inquiry into services constituting legally protected care activities. So like the activities of the funds here in Massachusetts. It prevents medical malpractice insurers from discriminating against abortion providers who are providing these services. And it goes on. I won't go, I mean, there's a bunch of really, it prevents the governor from extraditing people who help people get healthcare here in the state of Massachusetts. So it's huge. And so we need this. It's a budget amendment. So we hopefully can get it through quickly before Roe is overturned by the end of the month. And the one other piece of legislation, and this is at a local level that folks are working on, is deceptive advertising ordinances. So there is an ordinance pending right now in East Hampton to basically fine crisis pregnancy centers for deceptive advertising in the town of East Hampton. Amherst has a pending ordinance. City councilors in Northampton are considering an ordinance, a similar ordinance. Somerville, Massachusetts has already passed such an ordinance. You know, there's some division in the movement as to whether this should be prioritized, but it is East Hampton has a council meeting on July 6th and would like to encourage people to show up in support of that ordinance. Owen Zarat is the council member who's introducing it. So I can give you more information about that if you would like. But those are some of the things happening at the state level and some of the ways to find out about what's happening on the state level.
Yeah, I know we've been doing a lot of talking and link sharing and stuff like that, but please don't worry, we will be sharing it in the resource guide and Nicole will be sharing it in your email. So if you're not getting all the links or just want to follow up or on questions that have been raised, please know that is coming to you. So I want to end with this last question so we can get into Q&A. With what are some steps that people here in attendance or friends and families that we know can do to work towards reproductive and birth justice?
Lots of things. So what Carrie just said, call your senators and reps, call them, and tell them about all of the bills that you support. Ask them about the status of the bills, right? Make them do the work. Make them understand, so you can understand what the status is, right? Because we have named many, Carrie just went through quite a few different bills. And that's the reproductive justice agenda that we want people to, legislative agenda that we really want people to attend to, right? So it's not just about abortion, it's about reproductive justice. So the doula bill, the public university, college and medication, right? Like call them and ask them, what is the status? What is your support? We would like you to support this bill. And please let me know, right? And so like make them, because calling is the most important thing you can do with your state senator or rep. It's the most important thing you can do is call them. If you don't have the capacity to call, email them. That's the second most important. Touches, giving them communication is really key, because then they use those numbers to say, well, you know, my constituents aren't. So please tell your friends and family to call them. Talk to your friends and family about abortion. Understand the factual things that we just talked about. If you're not sure about some of the facts, research that. Reach out to us. Ask us questions. We are more than happy and ready to answer any questions that you still are not feeling completely sure about. But talk to your friends and family about abortion. We have to make abortion feel so normal that my high dream would be that all support services that are needed are just automatically taken care of, right? Like high dream, some kind of legislation that says, if you're going to receive an abortion, then you automatically get a hotel room and childcare paid for, right? Like you get a doula, you get all of these things, like, right? Like that's the level of normalcy. That's the level of normalizing the conversations around abortion that we need to do, because it is a private communication and a decision between a person and their doctor. However, the political cacophony has made that not an ability to stay private. So talk about it. And then finally, donate. Donate to us. Donate to any one of the funds through the National Network of Abortion Funds. Donate to private clinics through the Abortion Care Network. Private clinics are absolutely, independent and private clinics are going to feel the hit more than anybody else in this country. And we must sustain them through this time, because they are often the only place that people can access. And they're also here for more than just abortion. They are supporting people's health care. So it's important that we support independent clinics. Support abortion storytellers as we're talking about this, right? As we're out there talking about, we testify, shout your abortion. There's so many great abortion storyteller organizations that are ready and are supporting and maintaining abortion storytellers. We don't want abortion storytellers to ever feel like they need to come out and bleed for us or be a trauma story for us, right? Like they need to be paid. They need to be given their support financially for being somebody that's out there speaking their truth and their story, right? So please make sure that you donate to all of these types of groups. If you can only donate to one, there's the Act Blue that allows you to donate to all the funds at once. So again, a lot of these resources will be put into the follow-up, as Greer and Nicole have spoken to, but please make sure that you think about all of these different things and not just one of them. Email, donate, and in talking about abortion, really critical.
And Marissa, I wanted to chime in too. My apologies, Carrie, if I'm cutting you off, but I also wanted to state some of our state representatives are very active on social media. Lindsay Sabados is very active on social media and engages on social media. Mindy Dome is very active on social media and engages on social media and schedules office hours and virtual office hours. Joe Comerford. One of the things I can definitely say outside of Hampton County, unfortunately, is we do have very good women representation in terms of state legislation. So definitely there's multiple modes that you can reach out to our representatives.
Yeah, so I would just add all of what Marissa said. I also would like to add that these organizations need volunteers. I mean, certainly the abortion rights funds need volunteers to answer the phones, to do all that they do, but also you can volunteer with Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts or Advocacy Fund of Massachusetts, or with the clinics as, you know, as escorts or counselors. Reproductive Equity Now takes volunteers. And so if you want to get more hands-on activity, I encourage you to do that. Here in Western Mass, for instance, we're trying to organize a response on the day that the decision gets handed down, like a automatic protest at 5, and I've been sort of like, who can organize it? And so I don't know exactly what the status of that is, but we need to do something because people are going to need somewhere to go to vent and to cry and to do what they, you know, to speak out. So volunteering with organizations, I think, is a really important thing to do. In addition, I really want to encourage people to spread information about abortion pills. I think that the anti-abortion movement has done a really evil job of making abortion sound dangerous and to making it and to stigmatizing it. And I think that particularly talking about abortion pills, abortion pills should be available over the counter next to the Tylenol and Advil. It's safer than Tylenol and Advil. And the only reason we think of it as dangerous is because of the work of the antis. And I think that we need to speak out about how abortion, you know, we should all have abortion pills in our medicine cabinets. Providers now are offering them advanced provision. Go online and order abortion pills. I just yesterday ordered some. I'm past childbearing age, but I wanted to have some to show up when I do these talks. Everybody should have them. You can get them. You order them online, and just let folks know how normal it is. It's just like you want your period back, you take a pill, you get your period back. We need to destigmatize abortion in this country. And, it's the anti-abortion movement has done a really, strong job of making it sound dangerous and inaccessible and hard. And we need to normalize it. We need to demedicalize it. It really doesn't need to be medicalized at all. Although medical care always needs to be available, because in some cases, if there's complications, you do need access to that care. But I want people to know about telehealth abortion. I want, particularly if you have friends in those 26 states that are likely to ban abortion at some point in pregnancy, let them know about planseed.org. And on that page that I sent you, there's a drop-down menu by state, and you can see exactly what's available in the state that you live in and the legality of it. There's also an organization, by the way, I just want to give you a heads up on, called If, When, How, which has a repro legal helpline. If you're concerned about the legality of ordering abortion pills, they have a helpline. They'll answer your legal question. There are lawyers there, answer your questions. In addition, there's a organization called the M&A hotline, which is the miscarriage and abortion hotline. They provide medical doctors and nurses almost 24 hours a day to answer your questions about self-managing abortion. So spread the word. Those three organizations, Plan C, the M&A hotline, and the legal Repro legal helpline. Those are the three that people need to know how to get abortion in states where abortion is restricted. And in my right, I have an FAQ for abortion pills that I'll pop in here that I wrote for Ms. that has all this information. It explains what pills are, how to get them, how to use them, how they feel, the organization supporting people self-managing. I'll put that into the box.
Thank you all so very much. I would like to open it up to Q&A. There were a couple of questions that came throughout the panel discussion, and I want to thank our panelists for answering those. I want to open the floor to see if there's any more before we wrap up this afternoon. And I just want to reiterate that we will be sharing the resources that were shared in the chat today via a post-event email that we'll be sending out to registrants, which will also include a link to this recording.
I wanted to just, I thought I saw a question in the chat about how do you find out who are independent clinics? And I wanted to just pop in here. Reproductive Equity Now has this great page, which talks about abortion providers in the state, hospitals and clinics, hospitals only and clinics only. And so if you look at this, these are the clinics, and you'll see many are Planned Parenthood, but many are independent. So this is the list of the public, the people that publicly advertise that they do abortions. Now, I want to remind folks, a lot of private doctors do abortions, and particularly do abortion pills. So ask your doctor. I, at this stage, will not go to a doctor who is not willing to provide abortion services to their patients. Whether it's, an OBGYN, or every doctor should at least be offering pills. All they have to, it's very easy now. They can stock them, or they can use one of the online pharmacies that now provide the pills. So I would encourage you, just as an action, to talk to your doctor about, if I needed an abortion, would you be able to provide it with me? To me, why do they require us to go somewhere else? It's not a specialized procedure that you need specialized training. It's quite simple. Again, this is part of the stigmatization of abortion healthcare. There was somewhere, and I don't know where they listed all the crisis pregnancy centers as well. And there is an organization called Crisis Pregnancy Center Map. And this is a map of the United States with all the crisis pregnancy centers across the nation. There are over 2,500 of them. And again, they are also in Massachusetts. So if you select Massachusetts right here, you can see exactly where the crisis pregnancy centers are in our state. And they are, as you see, quite everywhere. Here, I'll just quickly, you can see. Sorry, I'll get off. For some reason, I'm not able to scroll down, but you can see that they are in many parts of the state. And here in Western Massachusetts, you can see where they are as well. So that's crisis. I'll put the link to that in the box.
And I wanted to point out what I just noticed on that map. They're pretty close to some of the colleges and universities. So that's even more frightening.
They do. Yeah.
Wow.
They try to target students.
That's very frightening.
It's very frightening.
And they also place themselves often in communities of color that are low income, that don't have access to accurate information all the time, right? Because there's, again, so many problems that are compounding in these communities, digital divide, right? Like all of these different things, and it makes for access to information really hard. And you see something in your community that you can walk right in.
Wow. So we just got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one I'm going to pose to Greer, Carrie, and Marissa. How do we talk to young women about the future of abortion rights without making them overwhelmingly fearful?
Well, I teach undergraduates, and my strategy is to always talk about what activist movements are doing, because that way they have a community. They have, they see that there's resistance. And because I think what feels depressing, if you just tell them about all the depressing things happening and not tell them about what people are doing about it. There is some amazing kick-ass activism going on in Massachusetts and across this country to resist this tyrannical banning of abortion. It is tyranny, and we cannot cooperate with it. And there are some amazing people fighting with it. So I try to share, like Shout Your Abortion is a great group for young people, because our Repro Action is another group. They're like in your face. They're protesting at crisis pregnancy centers. They're speaking out about this. And I think that can be really empowering to young people to see, young people live on social media, to get plugged into the groups that are, there's so many cool groups on Instagram with these incredible posts and visuals and videos. To plug into that community, I think, can be very empowering in a time of real despair.
And I mean, for me, I think what takes away fear is actual facts and speaking about it in a way that sounds empowering, right? And doesn't feel like it's turning belly up. Which is what I feel like we've slowly allowed for the erosion, because we haven't been so fearful in our communication back, right? Like we've adopted a lot of the language within the movement for access, the movement for reproductive justice, unfortunately has adopted a lot of the language that has been placed out through the machines of the antis, right? So we hear us saying some of the things that they have framed that also create and add to the fear mongering. So for example, late term abortion, that is not actually a real thing, but you hear it all the time, because when you slow down and think about pregnancy as a medical experience, using it in that frame that pregnancy has been medicalized way too much, right? Like the actual time that is considered late term in a pregnancy is 42 plus weeks. So they have muddled the language, the medical language, to be able to push their points. So we have to stop adopting that language and start talking about it as it actually is. So that's one of the things I think we can do to not make it fearful. The other thing is to dive deeper into the resistance movement, not just what's happening now, but what has been happening, right, for like thousands of years. People have been doing abortion care for thousands of years. It's only recently been politicized, right? Like it used to be, like I just recently saw in, I think it was the Cosmopolitan, some old magazine that had an ad for buying abortion pills. So it's not something that we need to allow ourselves to dive into the fear mongering that already exists. That's how we avoid the fear, is to not dive into it, but to actually talk about it as a factual medical procedure that is safe and that is accessible for people who need it, and to really minimize the reproduction of their language. I think that is at the heart of why people are so fearful, because they've bought into, right? Like we have, for the first time in the history of this country, since they have been marking polls, that's what it is. Since they've been marking and asking this question through polling, and for the first time in the history of this country, the majority of the country wants people to be able to have an abortion for whatever reason they need. This was recently just put out by the Wall Street Journal. I got it right this time, Greer. And and there's a couple of different polls that have recently come out, right? Like the majority of the country thinks, not with all those qualifiers, right? Because qualifiers are also another one of those ways that fear mongering has come in. It's not just the qualifiers, it's literally people are saying, bodily autonomy, people get to have the right to that. And they're kind of showing up in pro-abortion, which is amazing. And so just really quickly to define pro-abortion, in my opinion, the way I define it, so I'm going to use I language here, is pro-abortion is the idea that you are pro this person being able to receive the abortion that they need, and that's the end of it. We're not going to talk about the reasons, because bodily autonomy is the only thing that we need to talk about. If we hold bodily autonomy as true and sacred for everyone, then we don't need to hear the 5,000 different reasons or all the stories. Of course, we care about people and we want to hear their stories, but we don't need it in order to support them in this abortion. And so that to me is what pro-abortion is, right? That's what it looks like to be pro-abortion. So if we can talk about it in that lens, if we can talk about it from this empowered, everybody has the right to their own bodily autonomy and to make decisions for their own body, it stops being scary and it starts becoming, oh, look at all of the drama and cacophony of lies that are coming at me. You hear it and you see it for the lies that it is, and it doesn't sound so scary. It sounds actually quite depressing. And depressing from that, I feel sorry for you that you are so caught up in this lie. So just want to make sure everybody understands that, like, again, this is why we say what you need to do right now, what's the most important thing you can do right now, talk about abortion and make it a normal thing. And stop allowing it to be this idea that everybody's scared of, but people haven't actually, who don't know the experience or haven't talked to somebody that they don't recognize and understand that it actually is a very safe and procedure that, yes, it can be painful. Yes, it can bring up grief. It can bring up, and all those things can be true, and it's still not scary.
So thank you so much, Greer, Carrie, and Marissa, for joining us for a very, very important and informative conversation. I want to thank everyone who came in attendance today via Zoom and Facebook Live. I saw many, many, many of our long-term Women's Fund supporters join us today. Have a great weekend and be sure to check out mywomensfund.org for upcoming events.